Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of 19 Bosses, where we pull back the shiny curtain of corporate America and tell relatable stories in hopes of helping you all navigate the business world. Now, if you're joining us today for the first time, hoping that we will expose people and businesses all across corporate America, this definitely isn't the podcast for you. Instead, we aim to keep all businesses and people anonymous while still sharing these crazy and often relatable stories with all of you. Now, if you're joining us today because you've been looking for authentic stories, conversations, and insights about life in corporate America, or as an entrepreneur, you've come to the right place, and we're so happy you joined us today.
Hi, I'm Julie, a 25-year veteran in the technology space, a proud Florida State University graduate, and I had always hoped to one day have the opportunity to share my stories of corporate America.
And I'm Sabrina. I'm 5 years post graduation. 2 years I spent at Berry College, and my last 2 years were spent at the University of North Florida. I happen to be following in Julie's footsteps in the technology world, and I am so excited to be able to bring you these stories that she has shared with me over the years. And if you guys haven't figured it out yet, Julie is my mother. Now, before we get into the first story today, we wanted to answer one question that you all may have, and that is, why do we call this podcast 19 Bosses?
Well, I had always dreamed of writing a book, and I was going to share my stories of corporate America life. But the digital age is here, it's upon us, and this podcast just really feels like a more personal way of sharing these stories with you all at this time. When I initially thought of writing my book several years ago, well, at the time I had worked for 19 bosses. I've had a lot more bosses since then, and each of them have had their own unique story. And I learned different lessons from all of them. Some were more colorful than others, for sure, as you will discover throughout this series.
When you and I first started talking about this idea some time ago, I know that it was really important for you to be able to give back and help others navigate their own career journey. I know personally the lessons that you've shared with me over these past few years have really helped me in my own career. But what do you hope is going to come from sharing these stories with everyone?
Honestly, Sabrina, I have no idea what will come of sharing my stories, if anything, but it feels to me like they're worth telling. And I say this because I have been there. I have lacked confidence in my abilities. I have felt like I wasn't worthy of promotions that I've gotten. I've had bosses who weren't always there to support me. And honestly, there were just some days that I just didn't feel like I could do anything right. And I've seen a lot in my 25 years in the technology space. And what I have seen consistently is that the cycle is continuing with the next generation. I see so many young professionals every day doubting their abilities. They make a mistake and then they beat themselves up. It's honestly really, really hard to watch. But I know it, I can relate to it because it was me. If I can share some of my lessons learned with each of you, then perhaps there's a nugget or two that you can take back and apply to your own career. And my hope is that at the end of the day, I can help at least one of you by sharing my experiences and lessons learned, and that somehow you can take these lessons and apply it to whatever may be going on in your life, really either now or in the future. And also, the timing just really feels right as well, since I'm stepping out of corporate life and I am venturing into entrepreneurship.
Well, congratulations for making that step. I know that this has been something that you've wanted to not only do and share, but just making that transition, really going out on your own. So congratulations for that. But before we kind of, that's another episode, dive into what you're doing with as an entrepreneur. But let's start back and discuss how your life in the technology space in corporate America really began. And I think we should kick this off with a story that we like to call Bose and Warrants.
Yeah, so Bose and Warrants, I mean, those are two words that you probably never thought would go together. So let me set the stage for you. Okay, so imagine this. I was in my early 20s and I had just graduated with a master's in counseling. I was living in South Florida with my new husband. I took a job working with juveniles who had come from some pretty challenging home environments. It was court ordered for me to go in and work with these young boys and girls who had, in some way, shape, or form, gotten into trouble with the law. I was going into their schools, their homes, to work with them and their families to try and help get them back on the right track. Meanwhile, my husband, who was a federal agent at the time, so he was going into some of the very same places that I was, but for a very different reason. So, for those of you who are familiar with South Florida, I mean, it's not a small area. We actually lived in the Boynton Beach, kind of Palm Beach area, for those that are familiar with this part of South Florida. But it's a fairly populous place. And running across people you know unexpectedly, it just doesn't happen. Well, one day I did see someone that I knew, actually who I was married to, in a place that was quite surprising. Actually, he was very, very surprised. Me, not so much. So, my husband, your dad, happened to be serving a search warrant in the same housing development that my client and his family lived in. He was with his team of agents and they were in like full body gear. They were getting ready for this search warrant. And here I am walking around with the biggest bow you've ever seen in my hair. I mean, it was so obnoxious. It was like this, I still remember it because I loved it. It was this white bow with this big brass buckle. It was crazy.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah,
Never in a million years would you catch me in that.
no, I hope nobody can find a picture of that. But I was pretty naive. I'm driving this green Volvo. I'm getting out of it, parking, walking into this like common area, oblivious to the fact that something major was about to go down. So I'm wandering around. This is the first time I've ever been there. So I'm wandering around and I'm asking anyone I can for help, trying to find this home of this client that I'm supposed to meet for the very first time. And all of a sudden, I see all these flashing lights and at least 20 agents getting out of their cars and approaching the the courtyard that I was standing in.
What were the neighbors doing? What did you do? That must have been so surreal.
Yeah, it honestly kind of freaked me out at first. I didn't know what was happening, but then I started to recognize some of the agents, and then I saw your dad, and I quickly figured out what was happening. The kicker is, I hadn't told him that I was going to be in that particular part of town because I knew he would worry. So when he saw me across the courtyard and we locked eyes, I mean, honestly, if looks could kill, I would not be here telling this story. Boy, was he pissed. He had no idea, none, that I would be in that part of town, and he was completely caught off guard. Actually, we both were, obviously. He was scared for me, and that made me kind of scared.
Did you even manage to see the client or did you just leave? Like what happened?
No, no, I had a job to do, so I absolutely saw the client that day. It was actually one of my, for again, obvious reasons, more memorable first visits. But it was also a first visit that I was able to build trust with them. When you're in a counseling environment like that, it takes time to build trust. But because of everything that was happening, and they knew the agents were there to help their complex and that I was there to help them, it actually built trust for us pretty quickly. And I still remember that family very, very fondly.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of my like prouder moments of working with them. But there were lots of things I had to think about. So over the next several months, I thought about what I wanted to do with my career and was counseling something that I saw myself doing for the next 25 years. It was actually a lot to consider. I mean, on the one hand, I'd gone to school, I made a lot of sacrifices, personal, financial, to get a master's degree. And then on
For
the other
anyone,
hand,
sorry to cut you off. I just figured we should address this. For anyone who just saw a black dog walk behind me, that is Buddy. He has decided to come as a co-host. He is sitting physically behind me right now. I'm so sorry, Julie. I just figured, I mean, he's 95 pounds. We should probably address the elephant in the room.
he's a chunker. One of the
Yeah.
reasons I love doing this is I get to see you and Buddy on camera. But
Yeah. Sorry, to cut you off there. We were kind of talking about what you had to consider, and like
yes,
getting
yep,
back to the story of how you made this transition.
yes. So I sat down with your dad and we talked about it. And I, at the end of the day, needed excitement, but not the kind of excitement I had had that day. Um, I loved helping people. I still do. I found the work to be very interesting, and I have so much appreciation for my friends who are still in that kind of work today. Um, I really hadn't considered any other career options to that point. But then, after weighing the pros and cons, I decided that it would be best for me to explore other career options that fit my skill set. And I decided to kind of lean into some of my strengths. And I, decided to pursue a career in sales. And kudos to all of those in the technology space who never in a million years thought that they would also be in this career path as well,
Yep.
like
Here we
you.
are. I have a history degree, ended up here, sales as well, technology space. But when was it that you made that move into technology sales? Because I mean, we've already said you did that for 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for context, Google was only a year or two old when I started in technology sales, really barely a blip on everyone's radar. The technology space was really just ramping up. So it was a huge leap for me to go from counseling juveniles to working in the tech industry. But honestly, it was a big leap for a lot of people, just unknown territory. Nobody knew what the future would bring in this area. And it was a crazy ride for those of us who started in the early days. I mean, I did a 180 and it was the best decision that I ever made. Of course, I didn't know it at the time and it was scary, sure, but life happens and sometimes you just have to go with it.
I love that. I feel like that's a mantra for you throughout your whole career is just go with it. Now I have to ask, especially because for those who might know, I started out as a recruiter my first year out of college, and I help many people take that transition in their career, whether it be different fields or just an entirely different job itself. For you, when you made that transition, were there any skills that you used in counseling or just naturally had, that actually helped you throughout your sales career? And how did you see that carry over?
Yeah. So my perseverance carried over for sure. As you can probably tell from the story I just told, I was always dedicated to finishing the job at hand, even if the circumstances were unpredictable like they were that day. I mean, as many of you know, contract negotiations, marketing projects, product development, none of it ever goes as planned. And the ability to see things through to the end has helped me out greatly. I would say another thing that's kind of carried over from counseling is the ability to actively listen. My ability to really focus on what my clients were saying, really making sure that they were heard, was something that I'm not sure that I would have learned so early in my career if I hadn't started down the career path as a counselor first. I can't tell you how many times that my ability to listen to what a client or prospect said. Instead of pushing my own agenda, ended up helping me to earn their trust throughout my career with those that I worked with.
I really love that, especially you talking about how that active listening carried over. I think no matter where people are at in their career, but especially young professionals, when they want to know like what it's going to take to be successful, I think it's really important to discuss that there are more factors than just luck, talent, and work ethic to help you find success, no matter what career path you choose. Now, if you were to go back, especially knowing all that you've had, having the career you have had, would you have still made the career transition the way you did? I mean, it kind of sounds like you made the jump without a safety net.
That is true, but I think that's a story for another day. I have a lot to share about what it's like to make a transition and not know what the future holds.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a whole episode in itself. I mean, we could even talk about what you're doing now. Here's the first episode. You just kind of stepped out. So that'll definitely be for another day. On that note, thank you so much for joining in, everyone, and we hope to see you all next week.
Thanks for listening. And next week, we are going to talk about lessons learned from one of my first bosses. And I'm going to share a story that we like to refer to as strip clubs and conferences.
One of my absolute favorites, and I'm sure anyone listening in can probably guess what city that might have happened in.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.